Things have seemed to slow down a little bit, so maybe we can go ahead and jump in and get started.
Sounds great. Let's do that because we have a lot of information perhaps to cover, and we only have about an hour to do that. So let's move forward, Dr. Wolf.
Okay. Just some housekeeping items for us today. Obviously, we've got cameras and microphones and chat all enabled, so we're thrilled to be able to see people, but if you'll keep yourself muted until you need to speak to the group, that would be wonderful. That'll help us keep the ambient noise to a minimum. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. And right from the start, I'll say that there's probably no way we'll cover everything we want to cover today. And so we will definitely be holding a follow-up session to continue to talk through any issues that we don't get to. We also hope to send out a recording of this meeting as well as notes that we'll take and type up so that you have a written record of what we discussed and what was said. The handout that I sent that has all the questions has a few spaces there for you to jot down some notes if you want to do that and follow along. If you have a follow-up question, something that as we work through these topics you feel like wasn't covered, you want to ask, you can certainly unmute and ask. Because we have so many people, if that gets a little difficult to manage, we might switch to chat and ask you to kind of line up in the chat feature and ask your questions, and then we can go through them that way, but we'll see how it goes. And of course, any questions that you may ask today that we don't get to, we're going to write those down and we're going to add those to our list. I already have received some questions that were sent after I sent out the compilation, so we're just going to continue to compile those. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gatewood right now, who wanted to share some remarks with us.
Join the meeting.
So, Connie, Dr. Wolf, thank you very much. And hello again, everyone. It's great to have all of you here on this Zoom call, I guess is what we call this today. But let me begin my comments by first and foremost saying thank you to all of our faculty and staff. And I extend that thanks to our students as well. We have been confronted with the largest challenge and the darkest challenge in the history of our colleges. The COVID-19 pandemic descended upon us last spring, and it has interrupted, disrupted, and to some extent delayed our modus operandi. But at the same time, while I have no tolerance for this virus, it has brought out some of the best in us, especially with the quick and successful transition to a large, previously inconceivable virtual format. The faculty and staff here, that's you.
Rodney Barber.
Join the meeting.
The faculty and staff here, while we have not been perfect, and I include myself in that, nor would anyone expect us to be in a time like this. But in my humble opinion, we have exceeded hugely. Early in March, we created the ACC COVID-19 Task Force, and that is the team that's presenting to you today, or hearing from you today, perhaps I should say. And from its inception through today, we have not missed one Thursday morning at 10 a.m. meeting. In other words, we have met every morning at 10 a.m. every week on Thursdays. And the backstory of all this work that the task force has done and continues to do exceeds my ability to articulate in just a few minutes, and that's all I have today. But let me say that I'm pleased with where we are and in how we're wrapping our heads around maintaining the safety of all of you and our students, our highest priority. I proudly say that the college has technically been in operation every single day throughout the COVID-19. The core purpose of what we do is to support our students and community, and we are continuing to do just that. So today, as Dr. Wolf has mentioned, our team is assembled to answer your questions and to make comments as we deem necessary. And while I am here as part of that team, the task force has done a lot of work. So with my support, I want to give them this format as well as you, but to hear on your side and for them to really also answer the questions that you have. Of course, I'll jump in whenever I deem it necessary. we've already answered a lot of questions, as Connie mentioned, but of course, I'm sure you have more today and we will answer them. And let me just say this before I conclude. Other than in my home, where we're not receiving guests, not at the present, I feel safer here in this college than any other place I go. And that is because of the protocols that I know we have in place and that we're employing. And they range, as you all know, from sanitation stations to mask wearing to upgrading our heating and ventilation and air conditioning system, all of which helps to make this college as safe as we can make it during a time like this. So thank you for listening and thank you for participating. And if there are any questions that we can't answer today, we will get answers to them as soon as possible. So Connie, I'm going to give this platform back to back to you, and then you can get us moving.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gatewood.
Thank you.
Thanks also to Daniel Faulkner and Jennifer Jones, who are managing our Zoom call for us today, who set it up. Thank you both so much for helping with that. I wanted to remind everybody, of course, Dr. Gatewood mentioned the larger coronavirus group that's been meeting regularly on Thursdays, as he mentioned, since early March. And a subcommittee of that group is really the group, with Dr. Gatewood's blessing, that has worked on presenting this meeting to you today. And that group consists of Chief David Pravat, Carol Disk, Dr. Disk, Shonda Douglas Ward, myself, Gary Saunders, Elma Kendrick, who is our nurse educator, and John Nethery, who is our faculty representative on the task force. And this group has been compiling and discussing these questions, and we'll be providing some answers to them for you today. So we'll start out with the first series of questions, which is really the biggie. A lot of questions coming in about all of the many processes, procedures, and potential scenarios related to responding to COVID. The overarching or umbrella question is, why does the college respond with different actions when cases occur? Responses sometimes appear to be inconsistent to people. Can we explain the reasoning behind the actions that are taken? What factors are taken into account? And then there is a long series of very precise different scenarios and specific questions related to those. And I'm going to turn this section over to really our three top players for helping us with these procedures. And that is, of course, Chief Pravat, Shonda from the HR perspective, and Elma Kendrick from the nurse educator perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to the three of you to help walk through answers to these questions.
All right, can you hear me? All right.
David?
Elma, are you online?
Yes, I'm on. Go ahead, Chief. I was going to let you start off.
Okay.
And for the record, I would like to say I'm not the nurse educator. I'm a public health educator. I'm not a nurse. I'm a health educator. Thank you.
Take the promotion.
Okay.
All right, I think the first question is, there are many different scenarios and different actions as it relates to COVID-19. So Dr. Gatewood mentioned we've actually been dealing with and learning about this since January, the beginning of the year. We were one of the first colleges to start sharing information.
Join the meeting.
On our website about COVID-19. So as we looked around to our peers, there wasn't a lot of information out there, but we were putting information about what we knew about COVID-19, even in the early days of February, as we continued to meet. In January, February, the CDC started providing some guidance, and we continue to fall back on that guidance. Now, as the health educators, the scientists, et cetera, have learned more about this disease, the CDC has changed its guidance over the months. So what was the guidance back in March? Maybe a little bit different than the guidance that we're dealing with in November. And will obviously be even more different guidance that comes out as we continue to go forward. So I would say that the actions and response are consistent. What we do internally If we have a situation, is we're always consulting with the health department, and that's the experts in the field. So Alamance Community College Health Department, we reach out to them as many times, and I was on the phone with them today. We're in multiple meetings throughout the week, various different task force. They have developed an educational task force. So that means that ABSS, along with ACC, Elon University, has been working since March together in a task force. So we have tried to stay consistent with the guidance that's there, that's available. For one instance, you know, early on they talked about high touch areas, and then some of the guidance changed on that. So it wasn't as much on high touch areas as it was about the virus being airborne and the use of masks. You can remember early on they mentioned about not wearing a mask. So we had those months and days about a mask, but now we know the benefits of wearing a mask. So if we have a situation that occurs within a classroom or on our educational facility, the first thing we're going to do is analyze the information and what we're dealing with. And then the second part is we're going to reach out to the health department and get their guidance as to what to do. So Elma, do you have any other comments on that question?
Yes, sir. I would just like to say, to go along with what Chief Prevet said, that is true. Our when we make our decisions, we do consult with Alamance County Health Department, but we also, Alamance Health Department and ACC, we all are governed by the CDC guidelines. So when the CDC makes some changes that affect how we bring our information to you all, under the advisement of the health department, of course. And we also look at the situations, how many people, individuals in that particular population that we're dealing with, you know, as far as classroom settings, and how many students might be, you know, affected by our answer. And so therefore, like Chief Prevet said, we're doing what the health department has recommended for us to do, and we're also looking out for our students and staff safety as well.
All right, Dr. Wolf.
So when we look at the questions that are listed below, we've used the letters to indicate underneath number 1. Could we run through those and provide some quick answers to those questions, or maybe even just explain the factors that would be taken into consideration in those situations? For example, when is it mandatory that someone should get tested?
On testing, so what would happen if you were to test positive? So let's say you go out and receive a test. The test comes back positive. The health department is going to contact you. Their contact tracers are going to ask within a certain time frame, who have you been in close contact with? So what they're trying to refer to is, have you been closer than 6 foot to anyone, or a time frame of 10 to 15 minutes? And that guidance too changed within the last couple of months, and now they talk about a 24-hour period with that same person. So let's say you answered yes, I have been within 3 feet of someone that is positive. We did not have our face mask on, etc. They're also going to want to know that too, whether you had a mask on. Those are all the determinations. And let's say that, yes, I was with that person maybe for 30 minutes in a conversation. Well, the chances are, yes, they're going to encourage you to go ahead and seek testing. They're also going to probably put you in, since you did answer yes and you were in close contact with that person, then they're going to put you in what they call quarantine to isolation to see if you start exhibiting any kind of symptoms, etc. And then they would go from there. Once you got your test, if you tested positive, then you have a series that you're going to deal with the health department on the number of days.
Okay. Deborah asked a follow-up question that could we rephrase it to ask, what are the indicators that should motivate a person to get a test, which I think is a good follow-up to this question. When is a good recommendation for someone to go ahead and seek a test?
Well, you can always reach out to your health doctor, your local doctor, whether you're exhibiting any kind of symptoms. Let's say that you've had a fever, you're running a fever. Obviously, you may be trying to seek medical attention, and the advice may be warranted that you go get a test because of the number of symptoms that you're showing. Understand right now, we're also dealing with the flu season. So for instance, we do have a person that could call us and say, hey, look, you know, I got a stuffy nose, etc. We've had students to say, well, I've got a headache. Well, what we're looking at, you know, is this headache, is this something that you always have? Those are some of the questions that we ask the student. And they say, yes, I always have a headache. Well, is it a new symptom? So that's what the doctor is looking for in order to determine the test. So again, there are plenty, I know Elma has put out information where, I mean, I'm going to get tested multiple times. It's available there for you. So I encourage you to sort of know what your status is, because you could be asymptomatic and not even know. So again, go to one of those locations, know what your status is.
So Chief, would it be accurate to say, if I am experiencing new symptoms that are consistent with COVID, I should talk to my health provider about getting a test, and or just go to a testing site and get a test? If I think that I might have been exposed to someone who later tested positive or was exhibiting symptoms, then I should also contact my health provider to talk about whether I need a test, or just go get a test. Those would be two factors in which you would say, yeah, I probably want to get this checked out.
There's about 4 different scenarios when it comes to a campus exposure procedure. So we have the first, we have the possible exposure and the steps in order to deal with that. The second category is a person that is positive, that tests positive, but does not exhibit any kind of symptoms. The third category that you could fall into is that you test positive and you do have symptoms. And then finally, there's a fourth category where you test negative and you still have symptoms. The advice of the health department and CDC, let's say that you become exposed, best time to get a test that they have recommended when we've counseled with the health department is that 5 to 6 day window. What they do not want is, I just came in contact with someone and now I'm rushing to go get a test, because you could have a false negative early on. So again, they encourage you to wait to that 5 day window from the possible exposure to get the most and accurate test available for you.
Is there a situation, looking at another question in chat, that where the college is mandating that someone get a test?
Elma, do you want to comment on that?
Okay.
Elma,
yes. Only mandate that would come through that, well, first of all, the college would not mandate that you go and get tested. It would come in through the health department, because once that person, say one of our students go in, they get tested and their test is positive. Okay, after they get their conversation with the nurse at the health department, she will then ask them who are some people 2 days prior to your days of symptoms that you have had close contact with. Now that's when they begin their contact tracking. And then if you happen to be the student at ACC and you identified 2 other lab partners as close contact that you work together for more than 10 minutes together, a whole class, 3 hours or whatever, you are mandated to go and get a COVID test because of being close contact exposure. But the school would not make that recommendation unless it came through the health department, that a whole group or a whole class, but it would never come from the school to am I right, Chief?
Yeah.
That the school would never mandate it. It all would come through Alamance County Health Department.
Right, based on whatever the situation is, yes.
Okay. Do you need a negative test to return to school or work if you have been out due to a positive result? Do you have to retest and show evidence of a negative test before you're allowed to return?
And I think that answer is going to be no, because of
No.
because you've already, if you have tested positive, you were given your series of days that you were in quarantine. The health department is going to release you at the end of that quarantine. So there's going to have follow-up, and they're going to provide that documentation back to you showing that you're now safe to either go back into the workplace, go back into the educational, or wherever you need to go back to. So that's what we're looking for, is that documentation from the health department that clears you. So they're not going to recommend anyone to go back and get another test at that point.
Okay. We also had a question, what is the procedure if a work-study student has tested positive? They're a student, but they're also an employee. So what would be the appropriate approach at that point?
I'll turn that over to Shondo, since it's an employee.
Thank you, Chief Prevett, and good afternoon, everyone. So as we have stated before, the processes are similar. You're going to go through the same steps and processes of determining if you were less than 6 feet from that person or individuals, more than the 10 to 15 minute time frame, and no mask and exposure. So the procedures are the same. I think the only thing that's a little bit different when it comes to employee is that, one, we want to make sure that the supervisor is in the loop, because as I have shared with other people, I don't dictate the scheduling and work planning for each of the different departments. I only have that authority over human resources. And so HR will work in conjunction with the supervisor to make sure that they're in the loop and determine where that person is out and why they're out. And then we're going to follow, just like in any other process, the advice and guidance from our health department. And as we just stated, once everything is cleared, whether it's a negative test or a positive test, we get that documentation, and then that individual is allowed to return to campus for work. So the processes are very, very similar, with the exception of making sure that that supervisor is brought into the loop. And so we can also help manage the time away from work and make sure that everybody knows kind of what's going on through the process.
Okay. A question that came in through the chat was, as students approach faculty and mention to a faculty member that they're sick, that they feel sick, what should the next step be with that student?
Okay, so we asked people to voluntarily submit the self-reporting form. So that's what we're looking for, so that we have good information coming in to Elma, so that she can help evaluate that particular scenario. So let's also go back to the SAFE app.
Mhm.
So we've encouraged our students to download the SAFE app. So the expectation, if you'll go back to the video that we released at the beginning of this semester, which sort of explains those classroom procedures. So as that student's walking into the classroom, you know, you're looking at that app to ensure that they've sort of have that green in order to be inside the classroom. Of course, if they get an X, that means that they may have various different symptoms, so they should not be inside the classroom. We would also get an alert if it was an X. What we have done over the past, when we developed the app, is to change and modify some of those questions so that students could clearly understand, because again, we did not want the student to read it and say, the question says, do I have headaches? And the student is trying to answer honestly, but they're talking about historical headaches. I've had headaches for my whole life. Well, that's not what we want you to answer. We want you to answer it as if it was COVID-19. So is this a new symptom? So that's what we're looking for. So we've had to work with students so that they can, and we've changed the app to better help them too, to sort of guide them that they can honestly answer the questions and that they know that when they enter the classroom that they are not sick, because we don't want anyone sick within our facility. Should we have a student, let's say a student 45 minutes into the classroom becomes sick, so what we would want to do is to isolate that individual, give them medical attention, EMS, evaluate them. We may pause that particular classroom for the safety of everyone that's in there and be able to shift it online if we need to, based upon, again, the whole totality of circumstances and what we're dealing with that particular information. So again, definitely the message of we encourage you to stay home if you're sick. Notify your faculty member, work with them. Now, sickness can mean that I don't have COVID-19 and I've developed the flu. And I've taken a COVID-19 test and I know I'm negative. So I know it's something else. And again, just working with that faculty member to hopefully be able to make up your time with inside that classroom to be able to come back into the environment.
So what I'm hearing, to recap, is a student approaches you, says they're not feeling well, and you say, hey, you shouldn't be on campus. We want you to fill out the self-report form. Our public health educator will contact you and help you figure out what your next steps may be. Is it appropriate to say?
Join the meeting.
Of course, you can always visit your health provider or contact the health department yourself if you have concerns. Would that be appropriate to share with the student as well at that point?
It is, and by those students completing that self-reporting form, whether it's COVID or not COVID, it still allows ELMA the contact information and the follow-up. So as she's getting those reports, she's having conversations back with those people, students that have filled out those forms. So she's either having a daily contact with them or follow-up, et cetera, throughout a period of time. Same thing with an employee. That employee form, if it's triggered and somebody fills that out as a staff member, an employee here, that alerts Shonda. So Shonda's having those conversations with the employee.
What is the procedure if a staff member has been exposed to someone who has tested positive?
So again, we go back to alerting to those factors. And if you think that you have been exposed, and again, you want to reach out to that healthcare provider. I can't stress enough the importance of the self-reporting form, because if we don't have a form, then we don't know, and we can't give the guidance and advice and work alongside with the health department. So fill that out. The health the healthcare provider or the health department can advise on the next steps. And then again, if you are advised to take a test, again, we talked about sometimes you need to wait a couple of days and not just go immediately when you think you've been exposed to someone, to eliminate or limit or restrict some of the ability of the test coming back negative because you're asymptomatic. But there's the 14-day period where you can wait. And once you get those results, again, if it's a negative result, then you're okay to come back to the campus. But if it's positive, then the health department, health educator, health provider will advise the next steps for people to follow that have tested positive.
Shonda, a follow-up was in that situation where you've got a staff member thinks they've, been exposed to someone who tested positive. Should that person leave work right then? Should they leave work and stay away until they know whether or not they have it?
So I have been in conversations with the health department, and they say once someone kind of moves forward with that process, they should quarantine until they have results of it being either negative or positive.
Okay.
But again, please make sure that the supervisor and HR are in the loop, because we don't know what's going on. If someone just leaves the campus, we need that additional information so we can help advise and guide in the process.
So it sounds like it's important to have two avenues of communication. One is if you're a student with your instructors, and one if you're an employee with your supervisor, but also the self-report form, which then routes to Elma or to you, depending. So we have two lines of communication there to try to keep open so we all know what's going on.
Absolutely.
Okay. And the follow-up questions that were listed for that, I think you've already answered. They should quarantine if they have a positive test. And if they have a test and it's negative, they can come back to campus at that point. Another question, what is the procedure if a staff person is waiting on COVID test results? Should the supervisor be notified? But more importantly, I think we've answered that question. The follow-up to that was, should everyone in the unit also be notified and tested? I think that's the new aspect to the question here. Somebody's waiting on results. Who else should know?
So again, we'll get some type of communication that comes back to us as the individuals who are the points of contact for ACC. And we talk about this, and I know this is the bone of contention on everybody's mind, who gets to tell. And so one of the things that we are really trying to do is to have the confidentiality aspect covered. Think about putting yourself in those shoes. You don't want your information disclosed out to everyone. Because we're working through the health department, they're going to tell us the next steps. I know I've had several situations where before I can even call the person to kind of get more information, they've already contacted everyone. And what we don't want to do is to alarm people unnecessarily. But what we will do is make sure that those persons who need to be contacted will be contacted based on the information that we get back from the health department. So I know it may seem like eternity before we get those answers back from the health department, but if we could please kind of let the process work itself through so that we can make sure that we notify people who need to be notified, but at the same time balance and not put people on pins and needles. We want to do our very best job in making sure that we communicate to those that need to know and to get that information to them.
So I'll try to summarize some of that, see if I've got it correct. If, there's a chance that, let's say you've interacted with somebody who may or may not have tested positive, you've gone and notified all the people you're going to notify, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, I might have it. I don't know. We're in the process of finding out. And I sit in an office with 3 other people and I feel, I don't know, should I tell them what's going on? And of course, it's your own information. You have the freedom to share it, right? Where we absolutely cannot share information is somebody else's COVID information with a third party. That's, we cannot do that. But what I hear you saying is caution against just sharing that indiscriminately. It's your own personal information. You can share it, but let's be careful and maybe circumspect about how it's shared, because it can kind of perpetuate or alarm people unnecessarily. And you're saying, let's try to trust the process, trust the system at work, and the health department working with the college and all the people that need to know will be doing that contact tracing so that you will know when you need to know. Is that accurate?
Oh, I will give you a 10 on that. But, and in the scenario you shared, like you said, with those 3 people in the office, when that person who tested positive, when we start having those conversations, the health department is going to ask, who have you been in contact with? They'll generate that list of names, and then that information either comes back to me from an employee side or to Elma on the student side. And then we're able to pick up the phone and say, hey, this is what has been reported. This is the information we've gotten back from the health department. Here are your options and next steps.
Right. I know, and I see a question in the chat, and I know this has come up a lot. There often is a little bit of a time lag there. So it could be a day to 2 or 2.5 days, maybe. How do we manage that time, whether it's an hour or a day or 2? How do we best manage that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know as soon as I have got information, I try to circle back. And even sometimes before I get the information, I will call if I have some names already and just say, here's where we are. This is, we're waiting. And as soon as we have next steps, I'm going to give you a call back and give you, what you should do, what your options are. So just to let people know, we know about it. We've gotten the form, we're waiting, and we're working patiently with the health department. And I will say I have to give the Alamance County Health Department kudos, because I know even on the weekends, sometimes late in the evenings, they are really good about calling and leaving messages or contacting me and giving me that information so that I can circle back around to staff.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. A related question is slightly related. If you're working in a building and you learn that someone else in the building has been exposed, and again, this could be someone sharing that information. Hey, I think I might have been exposed. I work 2 floors below you, but, or I work all the way down the hall. In that moment, when you learn that someone in your building has been exposed, the question is, do I just leave work? Do I report it as sort of a third party to that information? What should I do in that moment?
Right.
So the person that needs to be concerned is the person that is in close contact.
Mm-hmm.
So let's determine if you're in close contact.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the definition. Have I been in close contact with someone less than 6 foot for 10, 15 minutes? That's what the health department is going to be looking for.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, nope, I was 10 feet away, you don't fall within that close contact. So therefore, they're not going to initiate anything for you because you're not at risk. So again, go back to that close contact, and what that definition means is how the health department is going to assess whether you need to be monitored, meaning need to get a test, put in isolation, or quarantine. So they're going to base it upon that. So let's say, okay, I tested positive. So the contact tracer from the health department is going to contact me, and they're going to ask me a series of questions. And again, I'm going to use the best that I can remember. I was back at ACC. It was on Tuesday. And these are the people that I know that I meet that definition, meaning I was closer than 6 foot for a period of more than 10 to 15 minutes in a particular room or environment. And I'm going to say, okay, and here's that person's name. And then from there, that contact tracer, and that's who we depend upon, is going to notify that individual, and they're going to walk through what they need to do. So that's how you're going to learn about it. So we do not do contact tracing. You're not going to see contact tracing. The contact tracing falls, the responsibility, the authority lies with the health department. They have a team of internal people that are doing contact tracing, and the state has also hired external people to do contact tracing. And that's what we depend upon.
Let
Okay.
me add one point to what you've said, David. And I just want everybody to be really clear, the within 6 feet, close contact for 15 minutes more, that can be in a number of different, during a number of different times. For example, I can stop in to see Connie for 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at midday, and 5 minutes in the evening. That counts as 15 according to the Department of Health and Human Services. So it's cumulative. Doesn't have to be all in one setting.
That is under the new guidance that came out within probably the last month, talking about the 24-hour window. Before it was just that 10 to 15 minutes, so they didn't measure it. But now they believe, again, as they learn more about this disease, that they now take that 24-hour window to, again, go back to Dr. Gatewood's example. Yes, I was with that person multiple times and built a window of more than 15 minutes in that 24-hour period. And so now the answer is yes. And I would need to go get either tested, quarantined, or isolated according to whatever the health department tells me I need to do.
It's difficult for the average person to keep up with the things as they change. So from February until now, as you pointed out, there are a lot of changes in what's considered possible exposure and close contact, and then what the follow-up step should be. And so I think what I hear you saying is that's another reason why it's helpful to not share too much information too broadly and let those that know about the most recent guidance based in science, let them trust that process to let them find out who they need to notify and notify those people with the appropriate course of action. So I think it may be another reason why it's helpful it's hard, but it's helpful to try to just wait and let that process work itself out. We did have a comment from the chat from Miyasha saying, we need to be careful with false negative results. We also need to ask about symptoms, which are just as important. So I guess two sides to that coin. There's the idea of the testing, but there's also, are you showing symptoms? What are those symptoms? Are they COVID-like? Are they new? And that is also an important part of this conversation, correct?
It is, and that's where you're dependent upon that medical advice, either through your primary care physician or the health department. Again, assessing what symptoms that you have, because as she has just spoken about, a false negative, well, that false negative can mean that you went out there again too quickly and didn't follow the advice of that 5 to 6 day window as recommended based upon the best science that's out there. That's what the CDC and the health department is recommending. So that's why, again, they don't just want you to rush out there with what you may or may not believe and feel that, hey, I'm gonna get this test, and you get a negative because you went out there too quickly.
Mm-hmm. Another question that's related to documenting temperatures. I know we have temperature stations, and students are asked to report if they have a temperature when they're looking at that self-assessment. Is there any move to actually documenting temperatures at work as things are, as we see an increasing number of positive cases?
Well, we encourage whether if you're an employee to monitor yourself, to know what your temperature is. If you're a student, to monitor yourself. What we have learned by talking to some students is we have learned that some students probably don't have a temperature thermometer at home. What we have done, we have ordered some. So as Elma has talked and dealt with the students, we're passing those out to ensure that they have what they need to get to school each day, and they can monitor their whether they have a fever, etc. What we have put at DC within the last couple months, since it is a single point entry building, so you have one designated point that you're able to walk into. So you got this walk-in scanner that employees, students have now become accustomed to, that checks the temperature as you walk in the building. We actually we had a person that was sitting outside too much, too long, and got overheated. Walked inside, and it activated the temperature, and the alarm went off. But in fact, after we checked their temperature with another thermometer, it came back to a normal temperature. And of course, it had been there, so it was just we do know it works. So it's going to register at 100.4, and that's what the CDC guidance is. Today, you're actually going to see, just as soon as John Young can push the information out, and Sarah, you're going to see a new setup in the Powell building, and hopefully we'll have more of those throughout the campus. But we know with our nursing, et cetera, they've been here since pretty much the whole start of this COVID-19. So you're going to see this kiosk as you enter the Powell building. And you'll see this little short video that was demonstrated by 2 students today. So it will recognize if you got your mask on or if you're wearing your mask properly. And it will provide a temperature by simply just walking up to this kiosk screen, so that you won't have to have any contact. You won't have to pick up anything, and it takes your temperature. So we're going to expand those as we learn more about new technology, because they are beneficial. So we do know that we have nursing, et cetera, different programs that monitor temperatures of students when they're doing labs, et cetera. So this is just going to be another tool that they can use to not expose themselves, et cetera, by just using this machine that we have now in place.
So DC does have the walkthrough, and everybody's walking through it, and it will sound an alarm if your temperature is greater than or at 100.4 or greater.
Yes.
And then in Powell, we're going to set up a kiosk that's going to do some similar. You can walk up and have your temperature taken, and it will also tell you if you're wearing a mask and or wearing it correctly. Okay.
Yeah, I
Right.
see some feedback already. So we've already had some of our faculty member in the Powell building use it. And again, it does work. It's interacting with students and faculty, and we see it as a positive. So our goal is to get one for the AETC and then the main building as we expand the use of those machines.
Okay. So there might be more of that coming.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to jump over to a few questions in the chat. James Adkins has asked a good question, face shields versus masks. Is there any guidance on which is more effective or anything there you should say?
Well, James, we do have face shields available. We have bought face shields to accommodate folks. But the advice is to wear a mask. But if the mask doesn't, for some particular reason, accommodate you, at minimum, you need to have some kind of cover, which would be this face shield. And we do have those available for students and employees to use if needed.
And then James also asked, we might need to add some barriers, whether it's the plexiglass or the plastic screening or sheeting between, maybe in the front of the classroom, between the whiteboard and the first row of desks, perhaps. I think there might be some interest in doing that. Would that be something we could do?
So yes, just put in your request, work through your department head, work through your dean. The information will get back over to myself or either Biff. We have, and we'll look to make accommodations where we need to make accommodations to benefit you in the classroom.
Good. So a quick question about we're getting a lot of questions coming in. So I don't know if we'll get to all of them right now, but a question about people who have pre-existing conditions who are a little worried about that time delay between when they might have been exposed and when they get information. They feel like they're a little more vulnerable. And I think so there's some anxiety about not knowing that they might have been exposed. And if they have pre-existing conditions, that might put them at greater risk. Is there anything that you could speak to related to that?
Elma, do you want to pick up that one for me? Shonda.
I was just gonna say that if there is that, you know, anxiety building up, you always have the option to reach out to your healthcare provider. You know, they can walk you through that process. You can let them know that, you know, we have been notified and we're waiting that information as well. But, you know, you always have the option to reach out to get more information from your provider if that anxiety is building up. We don't want anyone to feel nervous. And there is a little bit of lag in there that's out of our control, but there are other people that you can reach out to, you know, to be able to address those concerns.
Shonda, I think that's a great point. If you are feeling anxious and aren't sure what's going on, you feel like you don't have information and you are concerned about pre-existing conditions, we definitely don't want you waiting around alone and worried. So speak to somebody that you trust who can help you. And Shonda, of course, is able to do that, your supervisor, if that works for you. But I know we don't want people feeling alone and worried and anxious and feeling like they don't have information that maybe they need. So definitely reach out to somebody who can help you in that moment. And I know that we'll do whatever we can to help you with that. So I want to really reiterate that message. And I put Shonda's information in that email I sent late Friday. She's happy to help talk to you about any of that whenever you need to. I'm logging the questions that we're getting in the chat. I'm going to jump over to the questions on the sheet and ask, should we keep our doors closed when we're working in the office? I know we've had the issue of window open, window closed, door open, door closed. What's the best approach when we're working alone, for example, in our office? Or when we have people in there?
Well, certainly if you're able to close your doors, isolate within inside the office, and it's just you working in there.
Mm-hmm.
I know the college has made a lot of updates to the ventilation system, et cetera. So, you know, that's your, if that's your comfort, then we do want you to be comfortable in your work environment. So as long as you're able to, you know, accommodate and do what you need to when it comes to your work.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just piggyback Dr. Wolf on the fact that when you are interacting, that everybody should have a mask on when people come inside your office, even if you're standing at the doorway, whenever you're starting to decrease that length of space, mask on. I've seen people not do it, and I'm not going to be the COVID-19 police, but when you got two people sitting in there, that's when anxiety and fear creeps in, because you know that that's increasing the chance of, you know, spreading this virus. So I would definitely encourage the mask when, you know, two or more people are in a space together.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, certainly if you come in my office, you're gonna wear a mask.
I'm with David.
I'm gonna have my mask on. So it's just what I've come accustomed to. So that's the routine that we need to get.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have to take personal responsibility. So if we see somebody that don't have a mask, tell them to wear a mask. It's mandatory to have it on our campus. There are going to be times that a person's got to eat, got to drink,
Mm-hmm.
not around. They're outside that 6-foot window. They're socially distanced, et cetera. That we know that people are not going to have their mask if they're trying to eat lunch, et cetera. But we want them to maintain that social distance, stay away from individuals,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. So I think another question came in. Yes, we do have when the AATC was built, it had the specialized ventilation system already built in it there for you, Dan.
We did have a lot of questions that came in about masks and mask wearing as we were talking about this. I think for the office door thing, it's keep it closed when you're alone. If that allows you some protection. If you've got people in your office, maybe if you can keep it open, that might help with some of the ventilation. But always wear your mask. Always have your mask on when you're interacting with anyone. And someone had asked, you know, early on at the beginning of the semester, we said, if you're teaching and you've got a mask on and it's just hard for people to hear you, you can take your mask off while you're teaching in front of the classroom and everyone else is masked, as long as you maintain your distance.
Sorry.
To my knowledge,
Join the meeting.
we have not changed that particular guidance or recommendation, but we can certainly look at it as cases increase. I think that's where the idea of the barrier in the front of the room maybe is coming from to help mitigate some of that. So, you know, I know it's hard when you're teaching to have it on the whole time. Ultimately, that is the best scenario to be in for everybody's safety. The governor in his press conference today basically, you know, extended his mask mandate and said, that's the way we know right now that we can fight this thing, is if we are wearing our masks. And some of the questions in the chat, you know, pointed out some areas on campus where we will see students sometimes gathering without a mask on. And how do we handle those situations? I'm jumping ahead a little bit in our questions, but it seems a natural point to ask. We see a bunch of students without masks, or we see staff without masks on. What's our responsibility? Should we say anything? Is it public safety's responsibility? What should we do in that moment?
So again, that goes back to, we are all responsible employees. So we have a duty to abide by what the rules and expectations are here at the college, which are to wear a mask. So if you see somebody that doesn't have a mask on, tell them to wear a mask, okay? It's on the signs when you come in the door. It's our expectations inside the classroom. If we follow those protocols, we learn that people are working in a safe environment, and we want everybody to be safe. Now, if I see somebody out in the parking lot and they're going to the car and they took off their mask and they're jumping in their car, it's probably not an issue. They're socially distanced away, well away from me. So again, it is all of our responsibility to help enforce that. It's not one particular department or one individual that can do that. But we, the 150 plus people that are on the call today, we can do it together. So that's what we have to do. We can get through this together by working together. Do we want to touch any on the travel or anything? Because I know we're cutting close to time. So
yeah, we're getting close to the end of our time, and I know there are questions about travel, and I thank you for mentioning that. HR and working with student success, we are working on some recommendations or guidance that we're going to send out. Shonda will have guidance for employees, and we'll ask students, we'll get some help with sending a message out to students. You'll see it as well. Ultimately, we are recommending what the CDC and the state health department are recommending, which is we recommend that people do not travel and that they celebrate at home with their immediate household. Stay with your family and stay at home is the safest way to manage this pandemic right now. If it's necessary for you to travel, then you will need to just be very vigilant about following all of the protocols during your travel. We are not requiring anyone to quarantine if they travel or accept visitors from away into their home during the holidays. There's no automatic quarantine required, but we do ask that everyone do what we've already said, monitor your symptoms, recognize if you've put yourself in any high-risk environments, talk to your health provider about your trip and see if they recommend a test. Go get a test yourself, contact a health department. There are a number of things that you can do. And then if you do experience symptoms, if you do find out that you were exposed, then that triggers all of those things that we've already been talking about. So we'll have more specific guidance for that for you and for your students, hopefully by the end of today or tomorrow morning. Sean does that right. We'll be able to get that information out.
Yes.
Okay. I know that we're running out of time. I've made notes about the questions in the chat that we hadn't quite gotten to, and I know there's a lot of questions left on our sheet of questions that I emailed you. And so we are going to do a follow-up. We'll do as many as we need to get through the questions. We'll also send out some written responses as well. I can send immediately out a written response about the student withdrawals and what their options are, even though we're past the withdrawal date. I'd be happy to do that. And just keep sending your questions anonymously or through John and or me, and we will continue to compile those and work on getting them answered. Someone just asked, or someone just mentioned, hey, one of the chats commented on the fact that the health department might be working as much as a week behind in their contact tracing. So that is a reality that they could be swamped right now. And again, I think it just points to, from my health professional standpoint, of maintaining all the protocols that we know that we need to maintain to keep ourselves safe. Dr. Gatewood, I know that you would probably like to make some final comments before we go.
Dr. Wolf, thank you. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank our task force. I want to thank each of you. Again, as I said earlier, this is a very dark time for all of us, but it is a time that we can manage to the best of our ability if we do those things that we know are the proper protocols. We follow those protocols and we monitor our behavior. We wear the mask, we wash our hands, and we keep our distances. If we don't do dumb things. And I have to keep telling myself that as well. Don't do dumb things, Algie. And if you don't do dumb things, then you can be here on the other side of this virus. And that's, I think, should be one of the goals for all of us, is to be on the other side of this virus. We can do this. But as Connie mentioned earlier, when one of us deviates from the plan, it can affect many of us. So I care about you. I really, really do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here sitting in this office at this moment. Let's do the right thing. That may sound a bit cliche, but that is what we have to do. If we do the right things, wow, we have a great chance in a very dangerous situation. And I will conclude on that, but thank you all so very much.
Thank you, everybody. We've got your questions. We will get some answers out to you. I know there's still some more questions about masks. And so we'll continue to get some of those answered for you, because I know they're top of your mind. Thank you, everybody, for being here today and for listening and for sharing your questions. We really appreciate it. And please stay safe and wear your mask and have it cover your mouth and your nose, and stay 6 feet away from everybody and wash your hands regularly.
I'm wearing 2 masks.
And clean and I really hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving holiday, and we come back and we're able to get through the final weeks of the semester without any major issues, without having to do anything but keep doing what we're doing.
Connie, I wanted you to have the last word with one other thing. This is a continuous improvement type of process. So what we say today stands, but know that we will continue to augment what we do. This is not static by any means. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. You can have the last word, Connie.
Okay, so here's my last word. Remember always to reach out. Just reach out if you have a question, a concern, you're anxious or you're stressed. Find a trusted colleague or one of us, and we will be happy to help you in any way that we can.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.